This message is brought to you by House on the Rock Fellowship. We're a church that serves and cares for the Miami Valley region in Ohio. Before you continue, make sure to access the notes from our download section of our message page and have your Bible ready. Thank you for being our guest.
Saddest movie you ever saw? What? Titanic. I laughed. I'm just kidding. That part where Leonardo kind of sinks into the ground and then she does this little thing with the jewel, like please. No, yeah, that was on the list. I looked that one up. Saddest movies of all time. Titanic is right up there. Yeah. What's that? Sophie's Choice. I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it. Schindler's List. Schindler's what? That one was on the list. Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Yeah. Love Story. La La Land. I liked La La Land. Ryan Gosling can dance and sing. Matthew. American Sniper. I watched that one. Agreed. Schindler's List was on there. Green Mile. You know what wasn't there but should have been? I will never watch it again. Old Yeller.
That's what Jay said.
Did you say that? Jay said Old Yeller. I watched it probably 5 or 6 years ago. This is why I'm broken. Okay? Bambi. I know, Bambi. Disney just screwing it all up. But yeah, Old Yeller. I remember watching this. I'm like, oh yeah, and then the end of the movie, I'm not going to ruin it, but the dog dies, which seems to be a theme in so many sad movies. There's a dog that dies. I'm like, I'm never watching that movie again. Never watch that movie. I'll watch Titanic. I'll watch Green Mile. I'll watch Bambi. But man, Old Yeller, not happening. I don't need that kind of negativity. I do not need that in my life. Fill me with stories with happy endings. Ask my wife. I am quite particular on the movies that I watch and the books that I'll read. There is so much mourning and negativity I don't feel I need to enter into anymore. But Jesus does the complete opposite. Jesus seems to look for broken stories, searches out the sorrowful and the mourning. In fact, you unpack his most important sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, the very second line, blessed are those who mourn. They shall be comforted. It is so important this morning because I know that there are people here who are mourning and sorrowful, that we understand what Jesus is saying in this very, very simple line. To get this wrong sets us up for further heartbreak in our faith. To get this wrong will lead so many astray. And so there's a part in the sermon where I'm going to take us to a lot of passages in the Bible because I want to make sure our theology is rooted correctly in what Jesus is saying. Because there are some who will peddle a line like this. Oh, you're following Jesus? Everything will be great. In fact, the more you follow Jesus, the better it gets. No. Not exactly, not close. And so we need to understand well, what does it mean when Jesus says, blessed are those that mourn, that are overcome by such grief and sadness. They shall be comforted. To help us do that, we're going to look at a passage in Mark chapter 14. So the Sermon on the Mount is in Matthew chapter 5, but let's understand mourning and sorrow. But we're going to use a very important scene in Jesus' life in Mark chapter 14 to do that. Because Jesus was no stranger to mourning. He was not a stranger to sorrow or grief. In fact, one of the titles that he carried as the Messiah and the Christ was that Jesus was a man of sorrows. A man of sorrows. In Mark chapter 14, we'll look at it together. I'm going to start reading in verse 32. Just in context, this is right after the Last Supper, what we call the Last Supper. This is hours, just hours in front of his arrest. Okay? This moment in his crucifixion. He is in the garden with his followers, his disciples. And this might help us understand mourning and grief. And what is it that Jesus is promising? Blessed are those. You are on the right path if you are mourning. You're on the road towards blessing when you are mourning. Mark chapter 14, verse 32. I'm going to read from 32 to 42. You follow along. I think Eric's got some verses. There you go. Eric, you're awesome. Slam dunk, buddy. Good job. Mark 14, verse 32. And they went to a place called Gethsemane. That's the name of the garden. And Jesus said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. He said to them, my soul is sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. Going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, Abba, meaning Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, what you will. He came and found them sleeping. He said to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch, pray, that you might not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, the flesh is weak. Again, he went away and prayed, saying the same words. Again, he came and found them sleeping. Their eyes were very heavy. They did not know what to answer him. He came the third time and said to them, are you still sleeping, taking your rest? It's enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. My betrayer is at hand. What does it mean that Jesus was a man of sorrows? A man troubled and grieved, overwhelmed in sorrow, even to death, he said. Well, if you know anything about Jesus, you shouldn't be surprised. He starts his ministry saying as much. His earthly ministry is defined by moments meeting with those in grief, confronting sorrow and brokenness. If you were to look at his opening sermon in Luke chapter 4, this is how he introduces himself to public ministry. This is his opening message, okay? In his hometown, okay? Good boy, come home. This is what he has to say in Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, I'm going to read verses 18 and 19. I'm going to hit a series of verses pretty quick. You might just want to write them down if you get a little frustrated moving through the Bible. But they're important passages that you want to come back to. Okay, Luke chapter 4, verses 18 to 19. Luke chapter 4, 18 to 19. This is from the prophet Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. We talked about that last week. His followers, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Those who have rooted themselves in the story of God's deliverance, those who are in allegiance and obedience, walking with Jesus. The poor, the destitute. Theirs is the kingdom. I guess we shouldn't be surprised, right? Good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed. We can talk about that one next week. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And then he stops. Here's the problem. That passage doesn't stop there. He's stopping halfway through a verse. Now, his listeners know what comes next. This is a really important chapter in Isaiah. This is Isaiah 61. If you want to understand Jesus and the story, if you want to understand the Beatitudes, you need to understand Isaiah 61. He stops at a very, very key place. Can I read it for you? Just so you can hear it? Isaiah 61. If you're maneuvering a Bible, and if you open the book right to the middle, there's a real good chance you're going to find Isaiah, okay? So if you open the Bible to the middle, you're probably going to find Isaiah. Or the Psalms. If you're in the Psalms, just keep going to the right till you get to Isaiah. Isaiah 61. That's a big 6-1. Hey now, not everybody knows how to use their Bible. I love that sound. That's awesome. It's like music to my ears. Please bring a Bible to church. If you don't have one, we'll give you one free. Hit Lost and Found. We can probably find one with your name on it. Isaiah 61. It starts, this is how Jesus started his sermon, okay? But look where he stopped. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. We're going to talk about who's this me? Because the Lord's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Year of the Lord's favor is the turning of the tide. We're going to move from destruction and death into a restoration. But look at where he stopped and what comes next. The day of vengeance of our God to comfort all who mourn. To grant to those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes. Ashes is what you pour over your head when you're in grief. Ashes and sackcloth. The oil of gladness instead of mourning. A garment of praise instead of a faint spirit. That they may be called oaks of righteousness. The planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. They shall rebuild the ancient ruins, and they shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastation of many generations. There is one who's coming, the prophet Isaiah, looking in the power of the Spirit. There's one who's coming who's going to turn the tide. Move the chapter of warning and death and loss and disease and sadness. The overwhelming power of sin run rampant through creation. There's one who's coming who's going to turn that page to the day of the Lord when all that was wrong will be made right. Isaiah describes this individual, this me that the Spirit is upon, a couple chapters in front of this, Isaiah 52 and 53. Again, I'm trying to give you just a theological base. Don't get this wrong, okay? Isaiah 52 and 53. Isaiah 52, starting in verse 13, describes this individual. And see if it does not echo towards or look towards Jesus, the man of sorrows. Isaiah 52, verse 13. Listen along. Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up and exalted. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred, beyond human semblance. His form beyond that of the children of mankind. Meaning something happened to him. He was so beaten and destroyed, you couldn't even recognize him. Jump down to 53 verse 2. He grew up before him like a young plant, a root of the dry ground. He had no form of majesty that we should look at him, no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised, rejected by men. A man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. As one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our grief, carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds we're healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. We've turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. We see in these passages and these promises, in the message that Jesus opened with, in his prayer at the end of his earthly ministry, this man of sorrows. What is the source of his sorrows? Why is he mourning? And that will guide us in our days too. One of the reasons that Jesus mourned, the source of sorrow, was his constant confronting of sin. Jesus was constantly confronting, coming against sin. In that passage in Mark, he's praying to the Father, please, let this bitter cup be passed from me. The idea of this cup, the wrath of God poured out against sin and disobedience. This is what Jesus confronted his entire life. He felt it. He confronted it. It was his mission, it was his purpose. But for so many of us, we don't feel that way about sin. We've lost some of our perspective. Maybe I can illustrate it this way. What Jesus was asked to do. In August of 1945, Japan surrendered to Allied forces. World War II was coming to a close. And you know why Japan surrendered. Those giant bombs of destruction that ushered in the nuclear age and transformed how nations deal with nations. Well, while Japan was surrendering in August, at the exact same time, the Manhattan Project had not shut down. The Manhattan Project was the group of scientists leagued and charged by the government to develop these bombs of destruction. They had sent 2 over to Japan. They had a 3rd one in the works. And they weren't quite done working on it, nor did they want to finish. They understood the age that we were moving into. But this was a plutonium-based bomb, a little bit different than the other 2. A plutonium core that weighed around 14 pounds. Highly, highly deadly radioactive material. And in August, while Japan is surrendering, one of the physicists, his name was Harry Daghlian, was working on trying to better understand and contain this nuclear core. He was placing 10-pound bricks of tungsten around the core to best gauge and understand the criticality of the device, how quickly it would go to supercritical. And as he was placing these 10-pound bricks around the core, the meters told him that he was reaching supercritical. He needed to stop. And so he did not place that last brick around the core. But unfortunately, instead of removing it, he accidentally dropped the brick on top of the plutonium, sending the core into supercritical. He had enough sense to reach down and grab the brick with his hand and cast it off of the plutonium core, but not before he received a lethal dose of radiation. Accidents happen, we know that. He fought against the radiation poisoning for about 24 days. Eventually, he fell into a coma and passed away. Do not look up pictures of his image. Do not look at his injuries. What radiation poisoning does to the human body, the blisters and the burns on his hand. While he might have saved many, he gave up his life. Now, we understand that idea, don't we? It's part of our American narrative. Radiation, we've seen the atomic bombs, we've seen the mushroom cloud. We get a little bit, nuclear reactors and things melting down. We grasp that. And we certainly wouldn't play around with it, right? And not that the physicist was playing around with it. Accidents happen. Jesus entered the story of our sadness and our grief in a world overrun by radiation of sin and poison, with the sole purpose of getting rid of it. The confronting of that, facing of that, grabbing a hold of it with both hands would destroy anybody. He was a man of sorrows as he contended with sin. But he wasn't just contending with sin, he was also dealing with sinners. And sometimes we forget that that's two different things. There's contending with the sin, but there's also the contention that comes from sinners, those human beings. He gets to the end of this passage in Mark 14, and he says, hey, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. See, my betrayer is at hand. Who betrayed him? Was it his arch villain who ran around in a cape and the shadows and hunted him? Was it some evil systemed government who betrayed him? It was his friend. A man that he had poured hours and days and months and years into. A man that he had come alongside to nurture and to grow, who he'd eaten with and served with and walked with and run from the authorities with. It was Judas, a friend. That would lead you to weep. And not just Judas. Not just Judas. Judas betrays him, but Peter goes on to deny him. His closest circle falling apart in his greatest hour of need. A man of sorrows, familiar with grief. Jesus knew what it meant to be hurt by people. In his battle against sin. Hurting people hurt people. And Jesus knew it firsthand. At another passage in Luke chapter 19, we see another expression of this. Luke 19 tells of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, the beginning of what we call Passion Week. They're laying the palm branches down. They're proclaiming, hey, the new Son of David has come. He's riding upon a donkey. It's song, it's celebration, it's joy. Rome, we're going to get rid of Rome. We got a new man in town. He can even raise the dead. This is going to be great. But if you were to look in the eyes of Jesus, you would have seen a different expression. While they are singing and celebrating, Jesus was weeping. This is what it says in Luke chapter 19 and verse 41. When he drew near and saw the city, Jesus wept over it, saying, would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they're hidden from your eyes. Days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you, surround you, hem you in on every side, tear you down to the ground, you, your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation. I think this can echo to all of us who walk humbly with sinners, as Jesus has walked with us. Jesus looks upon the city that he loves. This is the city of David. This is the center of the faith. This is where the temple is. This is where worship is. The icon of his people. And he weeps. He weeps. Because they did not know how close grace was to them. They were reaching for other answers and other solutions and were resisting him. And Jesus, who sees, understands that in just a few more decades, about 40 years, Israel will rise up in a rebellion against Rome, and Rome really doesn't deal with that kindly. Garrisons will be released from Antioch in the north. Legions will march down to Jerusalem and lay waste to the whole city. And they will destroy the temple. To this day, the only thing that's left is the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. And in the same way, Jesus looks upon others, marriages and families and individuals, and he weeps. Do you not know how close grace is? You stay down this path. This is what's going to happen. The sin will surround you. The addiction will ensnare you. And not just you. You'll take your spouse with it. You'll take your kids with it too. And so he weeps. He mourns as he contends against sin and contends with sinners. So what does it mean when the passage says, blessed are those who mourn? They shall receive comfort. Blessed meaning the Lord's face is shining upon them. Blessed meaning they're on the right path. They're moving towards flourishing. What do they mourn? I would suggest they mourn the same way that Jesus mourns. They mourn in a battle against sin. They mourn as they contend with sinners who very well might be loved ones, family members. Here's our problem. If you go back to Mark chapter 14, Jesus is praying and he's asking for the Father's grace and comfort. And when he comes back to his inner three, his closest friends, what does Jesus find? He came and found them, verse 37, he came and found them sleeping. He says to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. Jesus is weeping, but his disciples are sleeping. Jesus is weeping over sin and weeping over sinners, and his disciples are sleeping. So he says to Peter, watch and pray that you do not fall into temptation. Yes, I know, Peter, the spirit is willing. I know. You love me, buddy. I know. I love you too. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. The flesh is weak. And maybe this is our problem too. Because instead of weeping, we're sleeping. Instead of confronting sin, we've gotten comfortable with sin. Because we have forgotten what sin does. It makes you numb. It makes you dumb. It puts you to sleep. It lulls you to sleep in your faith. So that you cannot feel. So that you cannot engage. You cannot weep. We've gotten comfortable with, familiar with, comfortable with the sin, comfortable with the sinners, loving on and gathering around and embracing and practicing in. Nine months after Harry Daghlian died from radiation poisoning, the physicists were back at it in Los Alamos. They had what they began to call the demon core, this plutonium core, and they had begun to encase it in beryllium because of its reflective capacities. So imagine you have a softball that's resting in a big salad bowl like this. And there was a smaller one that they were resting on the top, not completely encasing it, but just kind of close so that some of the neutrons could escape, so it wouldn't go supercritical. Well, the common practice was that there would be wood shavings and shims to keep the one bowl from going all the way down on top of the other one. You did not want that to happen. Then there would be meltdown, supercritical, it would be bad. So they had wooden shims to make sure that that top piece of beryllium never went all the way down to the bottom. Another physicist did not like to follow the rules. In fact, he was confronted time and time again by colleagues that he liked to do things his own way. His name was Lewis. And so it was his practice to remove the wooden shims and just use a screwdriver to angle the beryllium core one on top of the other. Until the screwdriver slipped out, encasing the plutonium core and sending it into supercritical. Same blue light blasting forth that irradiated Harry Daglin 9 months before, coated Lewis before he could get the two separated. And 9 days later, he would die in excruciating pain as his internal organs just disintegrated. Now I can understand Harry's accident. Accidents happen. But Louis was playing. He was playing with things you don't play with, in ways you don't play. Despite the warnings, despite the protocols, you don't play with it. We confront sin. We don't get comfortable with sin. And it leads us to mourn. It leads us to grieve as we see its effect upon ourselves and its effect upon loved ones. Now, you have to decide. I mean, a wise person has said this. You just have to decide your hard. You have to choose your hard. There's going to be hard, okay? Do you want a good marriage? It's hard. It's hard. Now, if you don't want to work on your marriage, guess what's going to happen? It's going to get hard. It's going to get hard. You want to be a good parent? It's hard. You're going to weep. You're going to cry. You're going to mourn as you contend with sin and the sinners of these children you love so much. Or you cannot, and guess what? It will be hard. It will be hard. Choose your heart. Do you want a vibrant, growing faith? Where you experience the working of the Holy Spirit and the ministry of Jesus and His presence. You want to open Scripture and just be guided and led by His Word. Do you want to just know what it is to walk with Jesus? Guess what? That's hard. That's hard. It's daily discipline, commitment. You will weep and you will cry as the Holy Spirit and His grace shows you and lets you peer into the vileness that is your radiated poisonous trees in His heart. That's hard. Or you can choose comfort, and it'll get hard later. Because I guarantee you this, if you're not crying over your marriage now, somebody will be crying over it later. Mourn first, comfort after. Or comfort first, and you will mourn after. So how do we, what do we do with this? You know? We're in this irradiated meltdown of a world that Jesus grieved and cried and mourned over. He says to His disciples in Mark 14, watch and pray that you do not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. Watch. Again and again, He told Peter to watch. Watch. Watch who? Watch Christ. Keep your eye fixed on Christ. Let His story shape you and mold you. Learn to grieve over the things that He grieved over. Mourn over the things that He mourned over. Let His story and His habit shape yours. Dial into that story on a regular basis. You know, as a church family, we've been reading through the New Testament. A chapter a day, Monday through Friday, reading, reflecting. We're just finishing up Mark. Okay, that's why for many of you, Mark 14 should have been familiar. That's why I did that. For some of you, I had no idea. Hey, cool. Join us. On Tuesday, we're starting the book of Acts. Let Scripture shape and mold. Watch that. Watch those things. Watch Him. Don't get distracted. Sin will make you numb and dumb. Don't even scroll and play. Watch. And then he says pray. He talks about the flesh is weak. The temptation, to play to the flesh, to serve the flesh, to be comfortable, to do the things that are comfortable. This is why obedience is so very important. As we go through the Sermon on the Mount and unpack Jesus' teachings, obedience restricts the flesh. It confines it, it pokes it, it keeps it awake, it keeps it attuned. It's weak. It needs structure. So you're going to go through the Sermon on the Mount together, and it's going to do things to you and ask things of you and poke at your spirit, and you're not going to like it. It's like someone waking you up when you're asleep. We must devote ourselves to obedience. And not giving sin any place, not playing a little screwdriver, trying to see how much we can get away with. It'll just destroy your family, that's all. That's all. So let the Spirit of God restrict us as we obey and commit ourselves to His word and His message. It'll keep you feeling things that you should feel. Sadness, grief, mourning. As you look around the world, as you look at a human being who's been ravaged and irradiated by the poison of sin, and you rush to them, to grieve with them, to mourn with them, to weep with them, to see a society that's chasing after all the wrong things, that's gotten numb, to learn how to cry over the things that you should cry over. Jesus was a man of sorrows. Notice that, gentlemen. He was a man of sorrows. That means on any given day, you probably would have seen Jesus weep over something. Real men don't cry. Real men cry. If you have children coming up underneath your care, if you are blessed with a spouse, men, may they see you cry over the things worth crying over. I get there's a big game coming up this week. Some of you will cry. Or not. I don't know. That's fine. It's fine. I don't want to take this one too far. Charlie Chaplin was the star of silent film, early days of Hollywood. Life is a tragedy when viewed up close. A comedy when viewed it wide. Many of us who are in grief, we can only see today, we can only see this moment. We're saddened over what's happened to humanity and what's happened over the story. We're saddened over sin and death. We're saddened over what it's doing to people, and we mourn and we weep over it. We're right in this place, and that's where we are. We feel it. We're up close. It is tragedy. But the story invites us to pull back a little bit, to see at wide angle what God is doing. Blessed are those who mourn. They shall receive comfort. Revelation 21. It says this. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away. The sea was no more. Sea meaning chaos, separation, death, no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming out of the heavens from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne. Behold, The dwelling place of God is with man, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. The Sermon on the Mount invites us to walk with people in their sin and their grief and their brokenness, and to mourn and to grieve over them, but not as a people who have no hope. Let's fix our eyes upon Jesus, the author, the perfecter of our faith. And though we mourn, we will have comfort.
Thank you for sharing your time with us, and we'd love for the journey to continue. If you're a guest, would you consider reaching out to us? We would love to come alongside and encourage you in any way that we can. If you're someone who's joined us today and you are desperately reaching to find hope wherever you can, again, Jesus came that we would find hope. You can find hope today. If you want to send us a short note, a member of our Hope team would reach out quickly, promptly, to come alongside and see what we can do to encourage you in whatever storm you might find yourself in. That's why Jesus came, and that's why we're here. Jesus said there's two ways to live your life, and a wise man, a wise woman, builds their life on Jesus' instructions. God bless.